Good afternoon. I'm Gloria Nelson with TUG, and so glad to have you join us today for our TUG Connects 365 programming. As you settle in and get ready for the start of today's webinar, let me give a brief introduction for TUG, the user group for both our current members and those of you who represent organizations that have not yet joined our community of online info distribution software users. We've all heard the phrase knowledge is power, and I can say with confidence that after today's presentation, you'll be waking up tomorrow with a little more of both. Today is but one of many of our in-depth sessions in our TUG Connects 365 series. TUG webinars, online forums, and member events facilitate the timely exchange of ideas and information to help you work smarter and with more confidence. Now that's a powerful combination. If you're currently a member, it pays to get even more involved. And if you're not, please visit our website to discover why 2,300 heads are better than one to help you be the best at what you do. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Paul Parsons, partner of Profit2, who is going to be presenting to us today on recover margin and control of your pricing. Paul, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thanks a lot, Gloria, for that introduction, and welcome to every other TUG member and future TUG member on the call today. Thanks for making some time. Hopefully the weather in your area of the world is better, is as nice as it is in Kansas City, where we're based out of. It's like San Diego here, and it's supposed to be that way for the next week or two. So we're pretty excited about that here. We'll have snow before you know it, though. Anyway, yeah, I'll start off by giving a little bit of background about Profit2, and then dive into some of the things that we're seeing from our clients as far as some ways that we're trying to recover some margin based on a very interesting environment the last 6 months for sure. It's affected us all in different ways. Some distributorships have done very well financially in the last 6 months. Some have struggled, and some have kind of kept the things kind of normal. But it's a different world, and so we'll talk about some strategies and ways to recover margin and maybe make some gains towards getting back to some sort of normal back in 2021. So we're, as I mentioned earlier, we're based in a suburb of Kansas City. We have worked for the last 21 years with over 300 distributors on strategic pricing and margin programs. All of our company's partners have spent the bulk of their career in wholesale distribution, and I think we understand the fine line that your sales team and executives have to walk between balancing volume and increasing margin in a hyper-competitive environment. We're not software to buy, and that can be somewhat confusing for some people. We're more of a software service. We've got software tools offline, but our real primary focus, and I think if you talk to some of our clients, especially, we've got, dozens and dozens of TUG members that are partners with Profit2, and there's two reasons, I think, initially why folks look to hire Profit2 for a strategic pricing or margin program. One is just the complexity with pricing. Most distributors have, well north of 100,000 pricing decisions they make over the course of a year. Some have, in the neighborhood of over 1 million pricing decisions. And there is a tremendous amount of, if you think about the number of items you sell in stock, the number of customers you serve over such a large geographic area, it's such a big job for an internal pricing team or a financial team or operations team to manage that level of complexity. The other side of the coin is the Salesforce behavior challenges that can occur. I'd say that 95% of our clients are privately held businesses. They've been around for, many times 2, 3, 4 generations, and they were, started by a really strong, and in many cases, a really strong salesperson, and that's permeated throughout their business. And they've empowered their sales team to have a pretty wide degree of pricing control over the years, and I think that's a good thing for the most part. Now, there are some areas where that can present challenges. And if you can look at my screen real quickly, I'll kind of show you some things that are kind of typical with the clients that we work with. For most distributors that we work with, 70% of their items are, margin sensitive, a lot of dollars, more commoditized, price sensitive, items that they really understand the high price impression in their marketplaces. They understand how their customers buy those items. And those items typically are best priced by the internal folks. I mean, they've got boots on the ground. They've been working with these items for years. They understand those items, but they usually only represent about 2 to 3% of the total item count for most distributors. There's another portion of the pie. It's that gold little piece, a sliver of pie that you see there called incidental sales. And it's about 30% of sales for most distributors on average. And that can range, vary based on the actual distribution segment. But on average, about 30% of sales is where an item's annual spend is under $100 over the course of an entire year. Its purchase frequency is once or twice a year. And what we found in our practice in 2+ decades is that most distributors only have a 5 to 7 point spread between their average margin on their most commoditized items and where they're selling items that are bought, once or twice a year. And that's just too tight. There's a lack of differentiation in pricing and wholesale distribution. It's pervasive. And I think it's because of the empowerment that the salespeople are given in pricing in many cases. It's really hard to price an item that you don't have a lot of guidance on. And I think 90% of the time, most salespeople are conservative on those items. There's not a lot of dollars. Why would, what's the benefit of getting a couple bucks on an item and potentially sacrificing a larger order? If you have that micro viewpoint, then that really can influence how you're pricing these items that are bought transactionally. And unfortunately, whenever you have hundreds of thousands of those type of transactions a year, that can be a lot. I mean, millions of dollars of margin opportunity that you're leaving, where you're being underpaid for items that honestly have some of the highest stocking costs. So it becomes our job to really be very transparent with the sales team, work on two axes. One of the pure scale of setting the pricing structure up as functionally leveraging the tools you've invested in your in-force system as well as you can, and helping and giving horsepower to your internal team so they can really leverage that investment. The other side of the coin is cultural and designing a program that can be absorbed based on your team's needs. And every distributor is different. We've got some distributors that have put a lot of work into pricing discipline. Their challenge isn't getting people to use the system price. Their challenge is the system price is too low. We've got other folks that have pricing they're kind of like the Wild West. Pricing is all over the place. And so it really, everyone's specific, and our program is not canned. Our program is very specific. Our strategic path is specific, and that's just something we had to learn through hundreds of projects. We have to be very specific in how we make recommendations. Certain distributorships have pieces of infrastructure in place they like that work fine, and we have to work within the constraints of their system. Other distributors need an engine overhaul, frankly, and they know it, so we help them with that too. So let's talk about some of the margin pitfalls that have kind of been exposed over the last 6 months and have existed honestly for a long time in distribution. But sales bidding on non-profitable business and not having really strategic approach to pricing sometimes, especially in times of fear like this, can cause margin to hemorrhage. Most distributors have thousands of outdated contracts. They got their spread on their cash and small customers is way too thin. And oftentimes we see about one of the big challenges a lot of distributors, and this is kind of a consternation point for a lot of executives, is that their non-stock margin is a point or two below their average margin on stock sales. And that's an area of opportunity. Missing rebate opportunities, underpricing non-competitive items is probably the biggest one. That's the biggest return on investment on a pricing project, is really going after that low-hanging fruit, having more consistent, credible pricing. So what's the cure for margin paralysis? I would posit that the opportunity is now. There is no better time than in this environment. The last 3 to 4 months, our clients have made more gains on transactional items than they ever had in the history of our business. It's a great time to increase incidental items. You can get 5 points in the bottom 30% of your sales. I know that to be fact. It's happened for hundreds of distributors we've worked with. And we can work with our teams to have a program in place in less than 60 days. And I want to make a broader point about pricing. I don't believe pricing is an intellectual challenge. I think that everyone on this call today could reverse engineer a Profit2 program, could do this themselves. I really do. The challenge is not one of intellect. It's one of time and resources. Each one of our clients gets a project manager, an analyst, and we work together to compress the amount of time that it takes to implement a project and get the gain you're looking for safely. And that's our stock and trade. We're not going to be master strategists. We're tacticians. And we're not going to be academics about this. We really want to be have a functional program that you can do, that you can hold us accountable to, that's safe for your business, where your volume still is trending upwards. You're getting the gain you're looking for, and we have it in place 10 to 20 times faster than you could on your own. So that's really our benefit. What we do is provide resources and a plan. We analyze every sale. So we look at contract sales, we look at matrix sales, we look at customer stratification for pricing purposes, and then we provide measurable accountability, where we provide 3 core reports that our executives really are tuned into on a monthly and sometimes really honestly daily basis to understand where their pricing is and where they can make adjustments. And then we're also going to help provide maintenance. It's our job it starts whenever we start getting gain and we start importing pricing, because we want to make sure that this pricing is staying credible and purified, not only for the initial year, but month over month and year after year as we mature together on programs. I've got some sample data to share with you from one of our clients, and I think this would give you kind of some insight into how a program might be organized. This can quickly deviate based on the client's needs, as you can imagine. But the programs are specific, and clients are really asking us to do things that kind of fit their culture and behavior and the work they've done already. But this is kind of an approach that we followed with some distributor data that I'm about to share with you. Typically, we'll take kind of a 3-phased approach, where the first phase is more defensive in nature. I mentioned earlier that 95% of our clients are privately held businesses. Most are family owned or employee owned. And there's 2 things that can't happen on a strategic pricing project or margin initiative. We can't have the sales team revolt, obviously, and we can't have the price impression that our clients have spent years creating being torpedoed by some sort of error or some sort of overreach on a pricing adjustment. So we've got to be hypersensitive in phase 1 and really protect the business first. Phase 2 is about playing offense, getting the gain, hockey stick margin gain we're going after on a project, looking at the matrix pricing. So we work at phase 2 is the next phase on a project. And phase 3, as we mature together, as we start measuring results, it's a lot of our clients like to chip away at a program. You start off with small chunks, and then anxiety lessens, the sales team backs off. We had a client of ours in Madison, Wisconsin, who caught up with me 2 or 3 years ago at a trade show, whenever we could have trade shows. And he had said to me, he said, hey, we were standing in line at Hilton, and we were checking into our hotel room before the trade show, and he bumped my shoulder, and he talked to me about the reactions from his different branch managers. And this was about 18 months into their pricing project. And one of his branch managers said, hey, if someone ever finds out about the Profit2, program gain, we could be in trouble. And this chief exec, he was a chief operation officer, and his reaction to his branch manager was, well, it's been 1.5 years and no one said anything. And I guess the point being this is that sometimes the folks that are the most opposed to a project aren't your customers. It's actually the reps that work for you. And so we do a lot of work in the maintenance phase and ongoing phase of lessening anxiety, of getting folks to realize that this is a realistic approach. It's not we're not trying to gouge customers. We believe that our clients provide incredibly valuable services for their customers. They're a bank. They provide delivery services. They provide great advice. And there is a level of compensation for that need to be accounted for. And so if we can get a little bit extra for that portion of the business that's underserved today or being underpaid on today, that's a great way to get some more gain and have a pretty profound effect on earnings before income tax. So let's get into an actual client example from our practice. So, and by the way, we're going to open this up for questions at the end of this presentation. So if you just please feel free to kind of jot notes as we're going along, and we can talk about some of these examples or any other questions you have about our practice towards the end. This is some data from one of our clients who's given us permission to use their data for the purpose of a presentation. And if you look at the very top of this sheet, it says customer item combination. And that's a pretty straightforward, the definition of that is what we do basically is on a full project, we're trying to determine together which items to customers are truly margin sensitive. And if you look at the margin sensitivity of an item to a customer, the factors that usually matter the most are how often they buy it and how much they pay. And you could look at, for your distributorship, you could look at a global level and say, hey, here are our 20% of items that are our A items. And there might be 80 or 100 items that makes up your top 20%. Conversely, you might have 15 or 20,000 items that makes up your bottom E% of sales. And we think it's very valuable to understand at the corporate level which items are ranked A, B, C, D, and E. What we think is more valuable, though, is to be able to rank those items instead of at a corporate level to the customer level. So we count the number of times that a customer buys an item over a period of time, in this case, 12 months. And we calculate each one of those kind of transactions as one customer item combination. You could almost calculate it as a pricing decision. And if you look at this data on the screen, in 12 months of invoice line data, there were 56,000 plus items that this distributor stocks. They service almost 1,800 customers, and there are over 167,000 unique customer item combinations where an item sold to a customer over that 12-month period. On the next slide, we have a handful of examples where it's an individual customer item combination, where it shows the transaction type is a stock sale, the customer ID, item number, annual quantity, number of purchase events, unit price, average unit price, average unit cost, annual item sales, average gross margin. And it's kind of a distilled way to look at customer importance. This is on the far right column. We've got customer revenue on all sales over the 12-month period. And really the so what of this chart is the gross margin column. And what do you notice about the average gross margin? You probably notice that they're all different, they're all over the place. And if some of them correlate to the customer revenue, some of them correlate to the annual item sales, but not very few do actually. And it's easy for me to look at these 20 different customer item combinations and cherry pick 5 or 6 or 7 examples and saying, hey, could we possibly grab another 4 or 5 points? And would that have any material impact on this sale to this customer? And I think most reasonable people would say no, because the low number of purchase events, the low annual item sales. But like I mentioned earlier, this isn't an intellectual hurdle. Everyone on this call can isolate 6 or 7 examples where the math just doesn't work out. That's not the challenge. The challenge is there's 167,000 of these records in the database. And I think what our clients range in annual volume from 20 million a year in sales all the way to over 2 billion a year in sales. And some of our clients have pricing teams that are vast, put a lot of time into pricing. With the level of complexity, the level of data, they just don't know how, there's just so much work to be done. There's too much time in the day, or there's not enough time, there's not enough time in the day to analyze this level of detail. So that's why we're hired. We've just developed tools where we can quickly analyze data, put it together in a manageable way that doesn't cause a maintenance nightmare for your organization, and really shrink and compress the amount of time it takes so you can focus on the big picture, which is how can we safely increase margin for our distributorship. So this is a very micro way to look at the pricing challenge. The big picture is on the next slide. So this is that distributor's 30,000 foot view. And if you go to the bottom of this chart where it says total, it's an $81 million distributor where their gross margin is 26.9%. And we took those 167,234 customer item combinations and broke them up into 5 different ranges based on the total spend on that item to a customer over that 12-month period. And if you look at the spend, whenever if you look at the very top row where the annual customer item sales range says under 1,000, it's right at 20% of sales, right? So it's $16.1 million at 29.5% gross margin, makes up 20% of sales, where the average spend on an item to a customer is $105, and the frequency of purchase is twice a year. Now, if you compare that to the very top row where the spend is $10,000 or more, notice that is 40% of sales, $32 million at a 24.8% gross margin. But check out the annual item spend in that category, almost $24,000, $23,855, and the frequency of purchase is 12 times a year. So it's 6 times more than that bottom category. And so what a stark difference between those two columns. And whenever we met with the executive team that runs this distributorship, we had a couple of one thing really stood out to them. And it was an area that frankly, that they knew about, but they could never quantify. When they looked at their average margin of 24.8% on total, or 26.9%, excuse me, on their total 81 million, and they compared their average margin on all sales to their average transactional margin in the sub-thousand category, they only had a 2.5% spread between their average margin on all sales and where they were selling an item that on average was $105 over the entire year. And so the question that their COO asked me was, why is our pricing so compressed? Why do we have such a lack of differentiation in pricing between our average margin and our average incidental margin? And if you want to know the answer, I think it's pretty straightforward. You just go to that number of customer items column and notice where all the pricing activity is. 154,000 of the pricing records or customer item combinations or pricing decisions, if you will, are on their bottom 20% of sales. 90+% of the pricing activity is where there's the least amount of dollars, the least amount of purchase events, and they were asking their branch managers and branch leaders to make pricing decisions on items that they saw every other year. And for every case that they were offering an opportunistic margin, priced just where you want it, there were literally 10 other situations where they were pricing it just like the $10,000 and above items on average. And that's where the real challenge is for pricing and distribution. There's so much noise whenever the spend's low, not a lot of guidance, not a lot of purchase events, but so many distributors have kind of empowered their sales team to have a full range of pricing control. They're hyper conservative and they don't have good information. So if you look at the right side of this chart, we've got projections first year on the actual gain. And look at how little the increase is needed to get the type of results we're looking for. Under a 5-point gain on the bottom $1,000 item combinations gives you almost $800,000 in incremental margin gain. And that's only an increase of a couple bucks every 6 months on average for items in that category. So we're talking slight edges here. It's just a little bit goes a real long way for distributors to get the margin gain they're looking for, to have a tremendous ROI. And I've had presentations for sales teams across the country and in Canada, and we'll show the sales team, we'll show the organization a chart just like this. And their jaws drop because they're like going, gosh, I've never looked at pricing this way. I've never looked at our sales this way. I didn't realize how complex it was. And so now that, after they understand there's an opportunity, we want to discuss a path forward. Before I talk about that path forward, I wanted to get into the actual one other key piece of information that was really core for this distributorship whenever they wanted to hire us. We did a breakdown of their customers also, not just items to customers, but also just purely customers based on their annual item sales volume or annual sales volume. And the far left of this chart, we've got their customer importance purely based on their total sales. It breaks them up into 5 different bands from $25,000 below all the way to $250,000 and above. It shows the total sales within each range, total gross margin dollars, and gross margin percentages. Like almost all of our clients, the largest customers dominated the sales for this distributorship. 69% of their sales were on customers whose annual spend was $250K or more. But notice the gross margin percentages. Their average gross margin was 26.9%. They're only getting a 3% spread between their average margin and their smallest customers. Way too tight. Take that same analysis up top to the bottom chart. Now we're only looking at the bottom 20% of sales. We're doing the exact same customer breakdown. Check out the gross margin percentages. There's no difference. Every customer is paying the same for an item whenever it's $105 on average a year spent. So, and this is a we see this over and over again with distributorships. A lot of distributors really struggle to have differentiation on their more component parts, especially by customer item sales ranges. And that's a real area of opportunity for distributors. One of the easiest ways to get some wind at your back on a pricing project is to see if we can get a little bit more for our mid-sized customers, our smaller customers, whenever they're spending less on items. That's fertile ground where the sales team can get behind it. It's a nice piece of business we can attack initially. And then after we get some confidence and get some results going on that bite of the apple, we can start getting, as we mature together, and we can start getting a little bit more aggressive or start climbing the ladder as anxiety lessens, right? So between these two charts and the different examples we shared with the distributorship, they hired us, and now they wanted to know, hey, what's the next step? How do we approach this project? So I mentioned earlier that there's 3 phases that we follow. And the first phase is purely defensive in nature. And this is to help leverage the price, again, to help better leverage the pricing hierarchy within a given ERP system, like SX. And the first thing that we wanted to do was use customer-specific pricing, level 1 pricing, to set up defensive customer pricing records to protect the higher volume sales. So if you want to just use this example of this distributorship, if you can look at the 2 bottom rows, 5,000 to 10,000 and 10,000 and above, that 55% of their sales were in those 2 areas. But if you look at the number of customer items, only 3,000, or about 1.5% of the pricing records, comprise the top 55% of sales. So what we did was we looked at those. We took we peeled the onion back, and we just discovered that about 80% of those customer item combinations of those top 3,000, so roughly 2,400 of them, had a customer-specific price record in place. They already had a contract in place. They weren't going to be affected by the project, but 20% did not. So we wanted to make sure that an item that had a lot of dollars, had a lot of hits, was not going to be kind of unduly influenced by a pricing project, right? We got to protect that business. The top 55% of sales was sacred, right? And so what we did was create a customer contract at the current margin, and we locked it in. That's what the price was on that item. There's no margin gain on that portion of the project, but it's cheap insurance to make sure that we're not going to affect an item that could leave the sales team exposed. So that was kind of job 1. Job 2 was to selectively increase margin on current customer pricing. So we have a tool, and this is just a screenshot of that tool, where we're able to look at specific item combinations for a given branch managers, outside sales reps, counter persons, trading area, and they're able to look at their trading area, look at their individual customers on items within select ranges, and make decisions. So what this distributorship did was they looked at items between, I want to say it was, for this program, it was items between 2,500 to 5,000. There was roughly 3,000 customer items that made up their sales between 2,500 and 5,000. We divvied those up across their 11 branches, and each branch leader got to look at their 250 or so customer item combinations for their trading area. Took them about 2 to 3 hours to go through this review. Once they completed that, it told a pretty nice narrative, because if you calculate it, 67% of their sales were either kept at the same margin as the previous year, or it was reviewed by someone internally. And that gave, once the sales team could see, using numbers in a PowerPoint, through some orientation, through some coaching, that 67% of this was completely in their wheelhouse, would always be controlled by them. It really freed them up to help us affect that bottom third of sales. And that's where we started. This is where you start seeing that hockey stick margin gain, that 3, 4, 5, 6 point lift. And this is where we're going to start looking at the matrix pricing, deepening customer segmentation, using the items that are left over. And this is where we're going to start really seeing that hockey stick margin gain that we're looking for. As a part of this phase in the project, we're really looking to segment and stratify customers for pricing purposes. A lot of our clients have spent a lot of years working through their pricing infrastructure. They've got a nice customer segmentation profile in place. Maybe they've segmented their customers based on their industry segment, or their volume. We want to add things though, like profitability, lifetime value, buying power, cost to serve. And so, if we can look at the time between orders, the number of product lines purchased, their, delivery cost, order size, do they cherry pick you for A and B items? Do they buy a full basket of items from you? Things like that, and help enhance the work you've done. Or for some clients, they haven't done that customer segmentation by industry segment or volume. And that'll be a good starting point. Then we can layer it with cost to serve measures as we mature together on a project. But either way, we're able to enhance this and create a very specific algorithm for each client we work with. And that becomes their customer stratification profile. And we kind of tweak that as we work together. It's an iterative process. We're always trying to strive to increase margin safely for our clients, and anchoring and having a piece of pricing infrastructure like customer stratification, mirroring that together with the items that are left over after we've gone through that first phase. This is where, that's the basis of your matrix and the level, the level 4 pricing. And this is where you really start seeing the big gain on a project. To track that gain, we're really focused on accountability and measuring results. We have a program in place now that tracks really 3 core reports on a monthly basis. Within the next, by the end of this year, we're going to be producing this report on a daily basis. And the key measurements that our executives want to see on a project are: how much are we making, volume trends, Salesforce compliance and utilization reporting, and I've got a slide of that here in a second. The idea, though, is we want to provide accountable metrics, and we want to provide coaching to those that are using the system pricing. So this next slide is just kind of a focus on the utilization. It's a sample report where it shows an order taker, a customer ID, item number, extended line sales, sell margin, system margin, and how much the margin's been deviated from, and then it shows a margin loss percentage. And you could look at every order taker for every customer item they sell over any period of time that we got data for them, and we can calculate these numbers. And we have actually a TUG member based very close to our business that's been a client of ours for well over a decade. And we tell a pretty funny story about their business. They're kind of one of their patriarchs of their business. When they first hired us, would get these reports, and he would scroll down to the order taker that had the lowest ranking, and he would send an email, make a phone call. And the opinion we got was that you didn't want to be on the receiving end of that call very often. And so we're trying to provide coaching, we're trying to provide good data, we're trying to provide good conversation pieces, because sometimes overrides are necessary. Sometimes the system price is incorrect. We want to know if the system price is wrong. We want to know if a salesperson's caving, of course, or if they're trying to win business. And those are things that are great conversation pieces you can have. Whenever we start implementing a project and we import pricing, we usually go live within 60 to 90 days of being hired. And I wish it was like we turned a light switch on and then everyone was using the pricing, but everyone knows that's not true. It happens occasionally. What's interesting is that as we start working together on the reporting, you start saying things like, if they initially a customer might accept 50 to 60% of the sales team might accept 50 to 60% of the pricing recommendations in month 1. Month 2, after some reports come back, it goes up another 5 or 6%. Every month after, till about 6 to 9 months in, we're getting about 90% utilization of the system pricing. And if you think about a pricing project, there's really 3 things that matter. What percentage of sales are we influencing? How much lift are we getting? And how often are we using the pricing? And we can forecast for each person on this webinar today, the first 2. We can forecast what percentage of sales we can touch. We can forecast how much differentiation we can drive between how you price today versus what we could do through a project. What we can't forecast is Salesforce compliance, Salesforce utilization. So it's really core that we have the team dialed into this report, so everyone realizes once we have this infrastructure in place, once we have the culture developed where 90% of the pricing is being utilized, then that the margin annuity is there, that future price increases get traction. And that's the type of culture we're trying to trying to enhance with all of our distributorship members. And one other side of it, this is something that a client of ours in Minneapolis, also a TUG member, mentioned to us. And this, I'll never forget this. 3 years ago, we were pitching to a company in Minneapolis, and they said that it was a very unique situation. This was the company owner, and he had 7 salespeople, all who had been with him for 30 plus years, all retiring within a 6-month period. And he was incredibly concerned with the amount of tribal knowledge that was leaving the building in the next 6 months. And he felt like he hit kind of a ticking time bomb, where he had to make sure that the system price was credible, so the new blood that came in to take the positions would trust the system pricing, that there was good system pricing. And so I think that there's other peripheral things that can occur whenever you've got a nice, credible pricing structure that's consistent. It can be a great resource for new reps. It can be a great tool and infrastructure for margin. It can reduce the amount of time you look searching for pricing online. So there's other peripheral benefits other than just money, right? There's other things that might lead to money, but there's some nice things about your business that can help it run easier whenever you've got a nice piece of structure in place. One other thing, and then I'll talk about maybe some next steps and open it up for questions. And we also do a lot of work on pricing system maintenance. A lot of our clients have, just because our business has been built on saying yes, it's kind of we're a small business. We've got 35 or so employees throughout the United States, and we built our business on hustle. So we've got a lot of maintenance in place for our clients to help them to automate a lot of their internal pricing processes. And so, we work on customer pricing, customer segmentation, and we do all of this on a very scheduled basis. A lot of our clients, we're very active throughout the year, but we're super active in the fourth quarter because a lot of clients are getting vendor cost increases during the time period. So we're helping them appropriate the cost increases in a faster way than maybe they can do it internally. We've got programs in place to help out with non-stock pricing, and we can work on vendor cost allowances too. So there's, like I mentioned earlier, our company's been built on saying yes and kind of figuring it out. So we've got a lot of knowledge we've developed over the last 2 decades of clients asking us to help automate processes. And it's really helped us to keep their pricing system purified, maintained, and keeps the system humming, because there is a significant opportunity first year on a pricing project. There is a significant opportunity second year on a pricing project. Literally, the first year gain projection, you can get at least half the gain second year. So there's a lot of money that first 24 months. We still have our first client 20 years into this, and we're still easily exceeding our fee structure by the gain we're getting for them 20 years into this. So it gets more inflationary as we partner together over time. The hockey stick margin gains the first 2 years. But there are certainly some things that we can do to help shrink the amount of time your pricing resources are using on more mundane efforts, so they can focus on the bigger picture. We're rounding third, heading for home. So basically, the way the program's set up, we want to affect somewhere in the neighborhood of 30% of sales, get a 5 to 6 point gain on program sales with 80 to 90% program utilization. We want positive cash flow within 60 days after going live with new pricing. That means we're paying for the entire project within 2 months. And we want a sustainable annuity with reduced system maintenance, current incredible pricing. A couple of fine points before I open up for questions. We're industry insiders. We have spent our careers in wholesale distribution and working pricing. We only work in distribution. Our program is focused on gaining sales team support and playing defense and protecting the business and reducing our clients' risk. Our axiom is that we want to do the work. You handle the big picture decisions, and then we'll do the kind of the minutia. It's comprehensive, so we don't have like a silver, gold, or platinum program. Everything's included for one fee, and it's a straightforward fee. Our client of 20 years still pays the same monthly fee that they had 20 years ago. We don't have inflation clauses, and after the first year, it's a month-to-month fee. It's not a long-term contract. All the pricing records reside in our client system, so it's not a module that latches on. Where if you feel like, hey, I want to hire a project or Profit2 for more of a project basis for a year or two, you feel like you own all the pricing records. You're hiring us to affect change on the system. So So that's really our key differences, I think. One thing I wanted to offer TUG members before I turn it over to Gloria for questions is, and I wanted to offer everyone on the call a complimentary pricing analysis. My details are on the bottom right of this chart. Please write them down if you want to, contact me directly. But we wanted to offer anyone on this call a complimentary analysis where we can see how your pricing compares, pinpoint where we can increase more margin, learn how to help you safely build margin in that annuity that you're striving for without alarming your customers, and just review and benchmark your data versus how others have done it. The only investment you've got to make is the time to get the data we need out of the system. And of course, we'd send you a non-disclosure agreement so you wouldn't, because we're fiercely protective, obviously, of prospective client and client data. But it's easy to arrange, and I think that it would be well worth your time if you had some interest in looking at a project. So with that being said, I appreciate your patience, and you're very gracious for listening to me for 40 minutes, and look forward to any questions you have.
Well, good to be back on with you, Paul. One of the questions that I just had populate that I'd like to reiterate is that this webinar content is being recorded at the conclusion of the following business day, which will in this case be Monday. I always post the link of the recording to the appropriate ERP board. In this case, it's All Members Forum. It will be there, and it's also available on our TUG website under the webinar tab. And the most current webinar is always populated in the upper left-hand corner. So I wanted to just address that first. And let me move over here to screen share real quickly. And I'll pull up the questions that we've had populating for you. Okay, whoops, let's see, whoops, sorry about that. It's not populating on my computer. Hold on a second, I have to pull up something on my phone. I apologize for the delay and appreciate your grace. Okay, I couldn't pull up the window there, so I had to pull it up in the app on my phone. First question: we don't track our sales overrides based on your clients. What are the typical override rates for most distributors?
Great question. And frankly, that question isn't asked very often. We kind of have to peel it out of someone else before they tell us that. Most distributors have between 40 to 50% override rates for system price. So, it can be up to 1 in 2 or more of the system price lines are being overridden. And so whenever we look at a project, we're tuned into those override reports to kind of see how things are being deviated from. So it's pretty significant.
That's interesting. Next question says, I imagine the number of projects that Profit2 has been hired for, some projects have failed or not gone as expected. Is there a primary reason why projects don't work out?
That's a tough one. Gosh. No, wow, got me on my feet today for a Friday afternoon. I was telling Gloria this is my 6th presentation today. Gosh. Not every project's perfect. I think that if you'd asked me this 10 years ago, I would have told you that the most inhibitive reason to a project working would have been technology reasons, because folks had trouble importing data or exporting the type of data we needed for a project. That's really not the case anymore, and especially with Infor systems. Infor systems are honestly some of our favorite systems to work with. And so that's not an issue anymore. The main issue is culture. It really is. And I've told this to many business owners, that your culture's got to be able to absorb this. I've made a mistake twice in my career where I've taken on a client that I knew was a bad cultural fit for our business. And I know I paid the price whenever I presented this to their sales team. I knew leaving those presentations that this wasn't going to be a good project. And so I think if the executive team if this is this doesn't have to be your number 1 objective for the year, but it's got to be a top 5 objective. It can't be a number 15 objective. And so if a margin enhancement safely is important to your business, and you're going to pay attention to it, and you're going to let us, do our work, then you'll get the gain, and we'll make it reasonable. But it's also got to kind of fit the culture. So I think the cultural and behavioral challenge can stymie a project. I try to do a better job of trying to ferret out ones that aren't going to be good fits for our business. But I've made mistakes before in taking on some bad business.
Interesting. You know, as we say sometimes in business, it's like having to break up with a bad boyfriend or a girlfriend, depending on what gender you are, right? And those situations nobody likes to be involved in. So
Sure.
I think that from what I've gleaned from you, Paul, that with your transparency and your ability to discern truly where it's placed in the hierarchy of objectives and a plan of work for a company, that you know, you really kind of do your due diligence in making sure that there's buy-in across the board all the way down the line, not just at the higher level of decision-making process, so that you don't have to break up. That's a good thing.
Amen. I mean, you know, hey, we've been at a number of TUG meetings, and nothing's better. Before, you know, last March, I was in Dallas, and nothing makes me feel better than having a representative of one of our clients come up to us and say, "Gosh, what a great job! You know, things are going fantastically." And you know, having the opposite conversation it makes me feel a lot worse, right? So everything that I can do at the front end to make sure that everyone has full disclosure, what it's going to take. You know, the math is the math. It works out, right? But there are human components here, right? And if we can kind of calculate some of the risk involved with the program, you know, usually the dollars and us being willing to try to maybe create a little bit different culture that can be a big win for everyone. If we just can get out of our comfort zone just a little bit, it's well worth it usually. But sometimes it hasn't been. But that's those are the failures, and I will take full responsibility for them because they were my fault.
And props to you for doing that, because too many people will be Teflon and skirt it to someone else. So I applaud you for that. I have one more question so far, and waiting for anything else to populate too. Remember, the question and answer bank shows publicly to everyone, so that if you have a question that you know hasn't been addressed yet, everyone will be able to see it so that there's not duplicates. But feel free to, as they say on a Dame Edna show, talk amongst yourselves with regard to the chat feature that we have here too. So my last question is that I have right now is, when a distributor hires Profit2 and assembles a project or pricing team, who's usually involved from the organization?
Oh, that's an awesome question. You know, it really varies. I mean, every distributor seems to have a different person that could be in charge of pricing, honestly. You know, it's changed a little bit. And 5 or 6 years ago, that's a really tough question to answer. It could be literally anyone. In the last couple of years, as most clients have pricing executives that kind of spearhead programs, usually we'll have a pricing lead who's a pricing coordinator, pricing director, and then we'll also have maybe a member from finance, a member from operations, and they're kind of, it's almost like a steering committee. We've got kind of a day-to-day liaison. Then we've got folks that are available on a monthly basis for our monthly kind of check-in calls. And then also and this is kind of the one that's definitely iterative to each distributor. Some distributors will have a sales leader that'll be a part of it. Some distributors prefer not to, and that's kind of depends on the distributor. But usually it's a group of 3 or 4 key folks, maybe an executive sponsor. One of the owners could be tied into it. Go ahead.
Finance department?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Finance. Yeah, absolutely can be involved. Amen. But usually it's 4 or 5 key stakeholders. You know, it's not a situation where we might have orientation where all the branch leaders or regional managers or outside sales reps are a part of an orientation session, but they're not on a call every month. You know, it's not that scheduled, right? And so we want to be very respectful of their time. You know, they're trying to earn business and trying to create customer solutions. And so we're really trying to walk the balance between who can execute this project internally, then who also has for lack of a better term, the street cred to make sure that it sounds good enough. You know, it markets well internally too.
Right. Interesting. Absolutely interesting. Before we conclude and wrap up, because that's our last question, and I have control of the screen. Paul, I know that on your last slide that you had your contact information, but can you give an audible to us if someone wants to reach out to you? What's the best way to get you? Email, phone, both? And can you share that contact information one last time?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for that. The email address is pretty straightforward, paul@profit2.com, and that's the number 2. Then my cell phone number is by far the easiest way to contact me, 439-9705. Again, Paul Parsons, Paul at Profit2.com. This telephone number is 913-439-9705.
Thanks, Paul. And also thank you to each of you that have joined us this afternoon from your office or from your remote work location, whether that be home or a Starbucks. And Paul, especially to you for the in-depth sharing and look at the attributes of Profit2 this afternoon. As with most of our webinars, this presentation will be available on our TUG website for future reference and sharing. If you want to go back and review something, share it with a colleague, you'll be able to do that at the close of business on Monday. And we'd like to invite those of you who are members of TUG to continue this discussion online in our forums. And for those of you who aren't members yet, please visit www.theusergroup.org and join today. Our next partner webinar will take place next week, Tuesday, so watch your inbox and TUG forum boards for the announcement with the registration links. Again, thanks for joining us today. Everyone have a good weekend, and as they say in Hollywood, that's a wrap. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.